I never thought I would see her again. If someone had told me 20 years ago that our paths would cross when I found myself at my lowest, I would have laughed in disbelief. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a crowded train station among strangers rushing past, and I saw her, Sarah. It all began with my return home, though home had long since lost its meaning to me. After years of working abroad, where I lost more than I gained, I came back to my hometown to start over. And somehow, fate decided to play a cruel joke. Instead of leaving my past behind, it confronted me in the most unexpected way. Sarah. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, yet her image had stayed with me all this time. She was the one who had kept me grounded back then, when everything seemed uncertain. We were young, carefree, and I thought the world was at our feet. But life had other plans. I was offered a job overseas, and she stayed behind to care for her ailing parents. We promised each other it was only temporary, that we would find a way to be together. But years slip away faster than you realize, and reality often shatters even the best of intentions. For the first few years, I kept writing her letters, calling her, trying to keep the connection alive despite the distance. She responded less frequently, as if life was slowly pulling her deeper into its relentless currents. Then, I learned that her parents had passed away and that she had married. It was a shock, but I knew deep down that I was partly to blame. I had let our love slip through my fingers, caught up in my relentless pursuit of a career. I convinced myself it was for the best, that I could move on without her. But standing here now, looking at her across the crowded station, all the feelings I had tried to bury came rushing back. She hadn't changed much. Well, almost not at all. There was still that light in her eyes, the same one that used to make me forget the rest of the world. She noticed me, and for a few seconds, it was as if time had stopped. Lucas. Her voice was as soft as I remembered, and I barely resisted the urge to reach out and touch her. Sarah? I struggled to find the words. How do you fit 20 years of separation into a few sentences? Her expression was a mix of surprise, joy, and perhaps something like sadness. I felt my heart pounding like it hadn't in years, like a young man who had just fallen in love for the first time. We quickly found a small cafe nearby, a quiet corner where we could talk. Sitting across from each other, it was as if we were trying to make sense of this unexpected encounter. She told me about her life, about the man she had married not for love, but out of a need for stability after her parents' deaths. There was a hidden sadness in her words, and I realized that her marriage had not brought her the happiness she had sought. I listened, but my thoughts were racing. I had lost everything I once held dear. My career, my money, my friends. My business abroad had collapsed, and I was forced to return to this town where nothing remained but memories of her. And now, here she was, the woman I had loved with all my heart, who still stirred those same feelings in me. Sarah asked me about my life, and I couldn't hide the truth. I told her about my failures, about how desperately I was trying to start over. She listened intently, and there was empathy in her eyes, but not pity. It was genuine support, the kind she used to give me when we were young. You know, I always wondered if our lives could have turned out differently, she said softly as we finished our drinks. Her gaze locked with mine, and I felt a spark, a glimmer of the flame that had once burned between us. Maybe it's not too late? I found myself saying, hardly believing the words that left my lips. She didn't answer immediately, taking a deep breath as if trying to summon the strength to make a difficult decision. Her life was full of obligations now, things she couldn't simply walk away from. But I could see that her heart was yearning for something more, something real. We left the cafe, and I suggested we take a walk in the old park where we had once spent so much time together. She agreed. We walked side by side as snowflakes gently swirled around us, creating a perfect backdrop for this unexpected reunion. Memories flooded back. The touches, the kisses, the whispered promises in the dark. I could tell she was remembering too. I saw it in the way her gaze grew distant whenever she looked at me. When we reached the old bench beneath the large oak tree, where we had once made so many promises to each other, I stopped and turned to face her. Sarah, I know this might seem impossible, but I never stopped loving you. 20 years is a long time, but my feelings for you haven't faded. I want to try again. If you do too. She stood there in silence, her eyes filling with tears. I could see her trembling slightly, and I realized that we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if we could take the leap together. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for us. But could we really leave everything behind to give our love a second chance? The day I met Sarah again wouldn't leave my mind. I returned to my modest rented apartment, where my suitcases still stood unpacked, and sat in silence, replaying every word, every glance we exchanged in that cafe. She was as warm and kind as she used to be, but there was something different in her eyes. An unspoken sadness, a hidden sorrow. And now I couldn't stop thinking about her. Our unexpected encounter had rekindled old feelings. Feelings I had convinced myself were long gone. But the more I thought about her smile, the more I felt something deep inside me begin to stir again. She was married now. That word echoed in my head like a relentless drumbeat. I had no right to interfere in her life, especially when it seemed like she had already made her choices. And yet, the memories wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I woke up early, unable to sleep. Snow was still gently falling outside my window, and I decided to take a walk to the park where we had walked together just days before. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Perhaps her, or maybe just some traces of the past we once shared. But the park was empty and silent, as if no one had ever set foot on its snow-covered paths. Returning to my apartment, I felt lost. I had come back here to start over after my business abroad had collapsed. But now it seemed like everything had lost its meaning again. I had spent years trying to build a new life from scratch in a foreign country, only to end up with nothing. And now, seeing Sarah again, I realized that perhaps the most valuable thing I ever had was lost long ago. 3 days after our encounter, I received a message on my phone. It was from her. Lucas, I can't stop thinking about what happened at the station. You were right, 20 years have passed, but some things never change. Maybe we could meet again? I'd like to talk about everything. That short message made my heart race. She wanted to see me again, and I couldn't pass up this chance. We agreed to meet at a different cafe, away from prying eyes, to avoid questions and gossip. She arrived before I did, already seated at a table by the window when I walked in. Her face was calm, but I could sense the tension behind her eyes. We greeted each other and sat down, exchanging a few awkward pleasantries before I finally broke the silence. You look different, I said, trying to find the right words. She gave me a sad smile and looked down at her hands folded on the table. 20 years can change a person, she replied softly, her voice even gentler than I remembered. Sometimes we make choices that seem right at the time, but later, they don't turn out the way we hoped. I wasn't sure if she was talking about her life or the years we had lost, but I decided not to push her for answers. We began talking about the past, how everything had seemed so simple back then, how we had believed our love could withstand any challenge. But reality had turned out to be more complicated, and our paths had diverged. When you left, I didn't know how to carry on, she admitted. My parents were sick, and I couldn't leave them. And then I met Alex. He was kind and caring, and I thought maybe it was the right choice for me. Hearing his name made my heart clench, but I could see in her eyes, deep, sad eyes, that she wasn't truly happy. She had made her choice out of obligation, not out of love. Are you happy, Sarah? I asked, not even thinking about the consequences of such a question. She held my gaze for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to tell me the truth. Finally, she looked out the window, where snow continued to fall softly. Not really, she confessed in a barely audible whisper. But I have obligations I can't just walk away from. A heavy silence fell between us, and I didn't know what to say. My heart ached for her, for the fact that she seemed trapped in a life she had chosen for herself. But I also knew that I had no right to ask for more. We spent another hour talking about everything and nothing. By the time we left the cafe, night had already fallen. The streetlights reflected off the snow, and in that dim, almost magical atmosphere, it felt as if we were back in our own little world, where only the two of us existed. Would you like to take a walk? I asked, hoping she would say yes. She nodded, and we made our way to the old riverfront where we had spent so much time together years ago. The wind was cold, but being next to her made me feel as if I had been transported back to those days when we were young and in love. We reached a spot where the river had frozen over, and we stopped to look at the icy waves. She stood beside me, and I could feel her warmth, but also the invisible wall she had built between us. "Lucas," she began, her voice soft and hesitant as she continued to look away. "I don't know what to do. My life is complicated. But with you, I feel alive again." I reached out and gently took her hand. She didn't pull away, and in that moment, something shifted between us. "Sarah, I know it's complicated, but maybe we can find a way through it together," I asked, unsure if I even wanted to hear her answer. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. This was a moment on the edge. Either we would open our hearts to each other once again, or this chance would slip away forever. "I need time," she finally said, "but I don't want to lose you again." It wasn't the answer I had hoped for, but it was a beginning. We stood there, hand in hand, as the snow fell softly around us. The world outside seemed frozen in time, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe we weren't meant to relive the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could build something new together. Our last meeting had left me in a state of restless anticipation. I felt like we were standing on the edge of something real but also dangerous. The snow continued to fall over the city, muffling its sounds, turning everything softer and quieter. Yet inside me, there was a storm raging. Sarah had asked for time, but how long could I wait? How long could we live in this limbo where old feelings intertwined with the harsh realities of our present lives? That night I couldn't sleep. Her words, "With you, I feel alive," echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, tearing at my thoughts. I knew what it meant. We were both standing before an impossible choice. She was married. She had a life she couldn't just abandon. But I also knew that I couldn't go on living in the shadows of memories and hopes for what might have been. The next few days passed without us seeing each other, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. And when a message finally came, my heart skipped a beat. "Lucas, I would like to see you again. There are things I need to talk about." We arranged to meet in the same park where we had first confessed our feelings to each other all those years ago. I arrived early, standing by the old oak tree where we had once carved our initials. The snow fell softly around me, creating an atmosphere of silence and peace that I so desperately needed in that moment. But inside, everything was chaos. Sarah arrived in a long coat with the collar turned up, and my heart skipped again when I saw her. She looked tired, but she was still as beautiful as ever. We greeted each other without words, and I felt the silence between us stretch like an invisible thread, binding us tighter than any words ever could. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," she began as we walked through the park. Her voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the soft crunch of snow beneath our feet. "About you, about me, about everything that happened between us back then. And now. And what have you decided?" I couldn't help the question from slipping out, though I knew it might be too forward. She stopped, turned to look at me, and seemed to be searching for an answer in my eyes. "I can't ignore what I feel anymore, Lucas. But it's not that simple. I have a family, responsibilities." I could feel the turmoil inside her. It was almost tangible, like the cold wind cutting through us. Her words stung, but I knew this was our only chance to decide if we could truly risk everything for whatever was left of our love. "Sarah, you don't have to decide right now," I said, trying to be strong for her. Even though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it in the stillness of the park. "But you need to know this. I am willing to wait. As long as it takes. I'm willing to do whatever it takes if it means we can find a way to be together." She looked at me again, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can just leave everything behind, even if I'm unhappy. That would be selfish." "Sometimes being selfish isn't a bad thing," I whispered, "especially if it means finding your true happiness." We stood there, silently staring at each other. as I felt the cold slowly seep through my coat. But I didn't want this moment to end. Sarah was right there, so close yet still so far away. I knew this was a turning point. "I need to figure this out," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Give me a little more time, Lucas. I need to be sure of what I'm doing." I nodded, though every part of me screamed that I couldn't bear this uncertainty any longer. She reached out and touched my hand. A light, almost imperceptible touch, but it set my heart on fire again. She turned and walked away, leaving me alone among the snow-covered trees. I stayed there for a long time, trying to make sense of whether I had done everything I could. In the days that followed, I went through the motions of my life like an automaton. I worked at a small company, trying to make ends meet after the collapse of my business abroad. But everything felt empty. All my thoughts were consumed by her. I couldn't eat, sleep, or focus without hearing her voice in my mind, without remembering the look in her eyes. And then, one morning, just when I had nearly given up hope, another message came from Sarah. "I need your help. I can't pretend anymore." My heart leapt with a mix of anxiety and hope. We agreed to meet again, this time at her house while her husband was away on a business trip. I knew it was risky, but I sensed she needed me now more than ever. When I arrived at her house, she met me at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. She led me into the living room, and the moment the door closed behind us, she collapsed into my arms. "Lucas, I can't live like this anymore," she whispered through her tears. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when my heart has long been somewhere else." I held her close, trying to memorize every second, every touch. We stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace like two people who had finally found their way home after years of being lost. Yet I knew that the hardest part was still ahead of us. The next steps would require more than words, more than stolen moments. If we were to move forward, we would have to dismantle the lives we had each built separately and find a way to build something new together. The question was whether either of us was truly ready to take that risk. The moment I held Sarah in my arms, it felt as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Her body trembled against mine, her tears soaking into my coat, and all I could do was hold her closer, as if that simple act could somehow protect us from the storm that was about to come. We stayed like that, wrapped in each other, for what felt like hours. I wanted to freeze time, to keep her there in my embrace forever. But reality has a way of forcing itself back in, reminding you that moments like these are fleeting. Eventually, she pulled back, wiping her eyes, trying to steady herself. "Lucas, I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've tried so hard to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, that staying in my marriage was the best choice. But I can't pretend any longer. I feel like I'm suffocating." I gently took her hands in mine. They were cold, and I rubbed them between my palms, hoping to bring her some warmth. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Sarah," I said softly. "You deserve to be happy. You deserve to live a life that feels true, not one that you're just enduring." She looked at me with eyes that were so full of pain, it nearly broke me. "But it's not that simple," she said, shaking her head. "I have a life, responsibilities, a husband who doesn't deserve this. I don't even know if I'm strong enough to walk away." Her words hit me like a blow, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The rational part of me knew that she was right, that walking away from a marriage wasn't just about leaving a house or a person. It was about unraveling years of shared history, about hurting someone who had once been her world. But another part of me, the part that had been yearning for her all these years, couldn't bear the thought of letting her go again. "Sarah," I began, searching for the right words. "I know it's not easy. I know you have a life built around obligations and expectations. But you also have the right to choose what's best for you. You don't owe anyone your happiness." She turned away, staring out the window where the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in a cold, quiet stillness. For a long time, she didn't say anything. I could see the war waging inside her, the way she was torn between what her heart wanted and what her sense of duty demanded. And I couldn't help but feel helpless. For all my love, for all my words, I couldn't make this decision for her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I've spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, trying to live up to what everyone expected of me. I forgot who I was, Lucas. And now I don't even know where to begin. I moved closer to her, gently turning her face back toward mine. You begin right here, I said. With us. I know it's terrifying. I know it means stepping into the unknown. But you don't have to do it alone. We can find our way together. She closed her eyes, and I could see tears slipping down her cheeks again. I'm scared, she admitted. What if we're making a mistake? What if we ruin everything for nothing? I pressed my forehead against hers, closing my eyes as well, hoping that somehow she could feel the strength I wanted to give her. Nothing is certain in this life, I said quietly. We can't predict the future, we can't guarantee that it will be easy. But I know that living without you, after finding you again, is a mistake I can't live with. I don't want to look back in another 20 years and wonder what might have been. She let out a shaky breath, and I felt her hand tighten around mine. I can't go back to my old life, she said, almost to herself. But if I leave, if I hurt Alex, sometimes to find yourself you have to break things, I said gently. And sometimes hurting others is inevitable if it means staying true to who you are. You've already lost yourself once trying to please everyone else, Sarah. Don't do it again. We stood there, the silence between us heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes just before a storm, where everything hangs in delicate balance, waiting to be shattered. Finally, Sarah let out a long, deep sigh, as if releasing years of pent-up guilt and fear. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'm ready to try. I'm ready to choose us. But I need time, Lucas. I need to find a way to end things with Alex, without destroying everything. I nodded, relief and joy washing over me like a wave. Take all the time you need, I told her. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. We spent the rest of the evening together, talking quietly, making plans, but also simply enjoying being in each other's presence. It felt surreal. After all these years, after all the heartache, we were finally here at the start of something new. But there was also a shadow that hung over us, a knowledge that the hardest part was still ahead. In the days that followed, we began to steal moments together whenever we could. Brief, passionate meetings in quiet corners of the city, secret phone calls late at night. But as our bond grew stronger, so did the weight of the secret we were carrying. I could see it in Sarah's eyes, the way guilt gnawed at her, the way she struggled to keep up the facade at home. And though I tried to reassure her, tried to be her anchor, I couldn't stop the fear that maybe, just maybe, this was all too much. Then, one evening, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was shaky, on the verge of breaking. Lucas, he knows, she whispered, her words sending a chill down my spine. Alex found out. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I was going to tell him, but now everything is falling apart. My mind raced as I tried to process her words. This was the moment we had been dreading, the one thing that could tear everything apart before we even had a chance to truly begin. Where are you? I asked, my voice barely steady. I'm coming to you. She gave me the address of a small hotel where she had taken refuge after leaving the house. When I arrived, she was sitting in the dimly lit room, her face pale and tear-streaked. Without a word, I crossed the room and pulled her into my arms. She clung to me as if I were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. It's over, she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. I told him everything. I couldn't keep living a lie, Lucas. But now, I have nothing left. You have me, I said, holding her close. We have each other, and that's more than enough. For the first time, I felt a fragile sense of hope blooming between us. It wouldn't be easy. We would face judgment, heartbreak, and the debris of the lives we had just torn apart. But at that moment, with her in my arms, I knew we would find a way. We had already lost so much time. We couldn't afford to waste another second.